what was the culture in Israel at the time, the attitude to survivors. I was referred to in my generation as Sabra. That was the greatest badge of honor that you could have. What was behind it? One was the communication that you are lucky, that you are privileged, because you weren't born there and you didn't have to endure what they had to endure.
But there was... They being the Holocaust survivors.
Being the Holocaust survivors, but also they being those who had to grow up and live in the diaspora where Jews are being humiliated and are not free. And that's the other side. The other side of the term, and you think, if it's privilege, if it's wonderful to be a Sabra, what's the opposite? And the opposite in the language of my childhood, at least in my inner world, was the term that we as kids used for survivors was sabonim. They were soap. In other words, they were the people who allowed themselves to be taken to the gas chambers like lamb to slaughter. The attitude was one of, they were blamed in a way for the crime that was committed against them. Israel and me changed a great deal during the Eichmann trial, because it's during the Eichmann trial that for the first time Israelis listened to the detail of what happened and started doing their own soul searching about their attitude to survivors. But the Apperfeld story is this. To me, he is one of the most important writers of the Holocaust. He's written over 50 books on the subject. Now, he himself denies that he writes about the Holocaust. He says, I'm not a Holocaust writer. I write about my life, about what I know, that my childhood was there. In fact, he writes about the life of the Jews before the Holocaust and after. But the Holocaust is being insinuated. It's being indirectly evoked rather than directly confronted. He writes and says, you can't write about it. But I think when I spoke to you, the context was this. When he wrote his first book about the Holocaust, and he took it to Sifriyat Poalim, which was the publisher, the head office of Sifriyat Poalim was on my kibbutz, Merchavia. And they refused to publish it. All the established publishing house in Israel refused to publish his work on the Holocaust. Why? They said, now we are building a new country, we are building a new people. Why do you want to write and remember about, why can't you write about us creating a new society, a new culture, etc., etc.? And it was two individuals who put their own money who first published him. Now, this was a general attitude in Israel that I later on as a therapist wrote about, namely that there was an unwillingness or a reluctance to hear survivors' experience. And what probably motivated me more than anything else to write about my work with survivors was the constant, the common comment that survivors were also blamed for their silence. And I think their silence, I once wrote that silence, like talking, is interactive. They were silent also because their own families, their own children, their psychiatrists, their psychologists did not want to listen to their story. Further, blamed them to varying degrees for the crimes that were committed against them.
And perhaps for surviving.
And surviving is part of that. They survived because you used unethical means, because you did things that were wrong, etc., etc.
So this was the general sense of how Israelis thought survivors.
Yes, to varying degrees.
Which was then, as you said, changed a bit by the Eichmann trials, started to change it. And
the attitude in Israel, the way I read it, changed. Eichmann trial was a very big and important part. The Appelfeld of the world did publish, and people did read it. Survivors got a bit more confident, and some did write and speak. And but the big change to the Holocaust occurred after the Yom Kippur War, because the Israelis realized we ain't such hero ourselves. All attitude, you cannot pinpoint, but.
And I think tied up what you said is the relationship of Israel to the diaspora. And that's...
Yeah. To give just one example of many. Most of the survivors who came to Israel were Yiddish speakers. Israel, people don't realize it. It was illegal in Israel to perform in public in Yiddish. Jigan and Schumacher could not perform for quite a while in Israel. Survivors, as soon as they arrive in Israel, were put under a lot of pressure to also change their names to Hebrew. And to survivors, to retain their name was to retain the name of the people who perished, who died, who murdered. So to change their name to them to many was really, I don't know what words to use. It was a bad act. It was
death knell.
It's that Israel is telling them to put behind and not remember in name the name of those who survived, who perished, who got killed.
Yeah. Just to add to it, I think on a different level in Melbourne, so I'm growing up post-Shoah in Melbourne, and all around me was talk, but it was a knowing but not knowing. So because we were children, we were protected, but it was everywhere. As a pupil at Mount Scopus, half my teachers were survivors. There'd be on Warsaw Ghetto Uprising Day, there were things everywhere, and family members of my fortunate family bringing other family members out, looking. I had a grandmother who was constantly seeking out family and found them and brought them to Australia. So it was there. It was...
Yeah, in other words, the experience of survivors in Melbourne and their families was very similar to the one in Israel. And part of it is the tone, the ambivalence between wanting to know and not wanting to know, wanting to remember and not wanting to remember. I want to tell you at least one or two other anecdotes which I think illustrates the attitude to survivors. Age 14, I go to kibbutz. On kibbutz,
this is Merchavia?
Merchavia. Just to be humorous for a minute, the Hashomer HaTzair kibbutzim refer to their secondary school or to their schooling as Mossad. So I often say that I was on Mossad, and only then I explained that it was a different
And
Mossad.
Hashomerti, a youth group, is it very socialist, left-leaning?
Left wing. In my class in Merchavia, there were photos on the wall of Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin, just to be clear.
So this is 1953.
53, I get there. And in my, call it class, we call it group, kvutza, there were about 20 of us. We lived together, we were together the whole time. It's if we were a family. And this family consisted of about 10 kibbutz-born children, about 10 who were referred to as Yeled Chutz, which is an outside child. I was an outside child.
So this is your schooling. You're doing secondary schooling, and
Yeah.
because did you choose to do it? You were
Yes.
sent there.
No, I maybe one of the most important dates in my life was I joined Hashomer HaTzair age 10. And it became the center of my life. I loved Hashi. And in
Because in 1949
in-
something else major happened.
yeah, and in 53, it'll come back.
Yes.
In 53, age 14, we go to a work camp, important in the Holocaust story, in Yad Mordechai. Yad Mordechai was a kibbutz that called after Mordechai Anilevich. And the symbol of the Holocaust, Anilevich with a hand grenade in his hand and the tilted water tower of kibbutz. The Jewish heroism, Mordechai Anilevich fights in the Warsaw Ghetto, and the people of Yad Mordechai fighting the Egyptians in 48. However, I was there on a work camp for a month, and my best friend and me decide that we do not want to wait till we are 18 to, we call it Hakshama Ishit, to actualize ourselves. So we hitchhike. We get 3 more of our friends, so 5 of us hitchhike to Merchavia and say we would like to join. And they interview us each separately and agreed in my case and his, subject to our parents agreeing. So we went home and said we want to go to kibbutz, and the parents agreed. So to me, I mean, when I tell the story today, I know, even to me, it sounds incredible,
Almost far-fetched.
far-fetched, unbelievable, but it wasn't then really. It wasn't that unusual, and there were many difficulties on kibbutz, but basically I remain a very grateful for the education, for the life that I had there.
Just what would have happened if you hadn't have gone there? What do you think maybe your path?
Who knows? You know, it's
Really had a big influence.
you know, lots in life you take a turn one way or another that you know it's a seminal direction, and without it you can imagine, but who knows. But I want to come back to be focused, because as I said, there were on my group, there were about 10 kibbutz children, 10 outside children, and one child who was referred to, one boy, by the, who was referred to as Yeled Gola. He was a diaspora child. And his story is worth telling because of the way it reflected on the society in which I grew up that shaped me. He survived the Holocaust in hiding in Germany with his 2 brothers. 3 boys survived. They arrived in Israel with Youth Aliyah, and Youth Aliyah separate them because that would help them to integrate and become the new Jews much quicker. And he's sent to Merchavia. He gets there age 6, 7, 8. When I arrived, age 14, I remember every night he would hide bread, food under the bed. And not once did anybody talk about why is he doing it. We all understood, but nobody ever spoke.
So it was like it was understood, again, knowing but not knowing.
No, knowing but not speaking.
Speaking.
There's a difference. I think everybody knew, there was no doubt in anybody's mind what it was about.
But how did you gather that? How would you have known?
To answer it, I'll be provocative. Did you ever ask your parents about their sex life? I bet the answer is no. Did they ever tell you, Pauline, don't ask us about our sex life?
No.
How did you know not to ask? It's not you. It's everybody.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
All children know that there are certain
Taboo.
taboos. Nobody says that they are taboo. We all know.
So that's the Holocaust was taboo.
And the Holocaust, it's things you don't talk about. We could come back to it because it's, to me, central to my work as a therapist. But at the moment I'm in Merchavia, age 14, we all knew. However, what happened is, I meet this guy years and years later, and we start talking. And he said, no, you are wrong. I did not leave Merchavia after year 12, at the end of our schooling. I left a year earlier. I didn't know about it because I was a shaliach emissary to Haifa, so I was commuting between kibbutz and Haifa because I was involved in running Hashomer HaTzair in Haifa. Again, it's amazing today that a 17-year-old is sent half the country to run a thing. But that's Israel at the time. Coming back, what happened to him was this. He turned 18, he was a bit older than us. So he was called to the secretariat of the school and he was told, you have to go home. He said, why? He said, the Jewish agency stopped paying for you. But he said, but that's my home. But they said, you have to go home. It was a conversation between the deaf. So he says to them, look, next to Kibbutz Merchavia, there is Moshav Merchavia. Let me stay on Kibbutz, and I'll just work, I won't study, until at the end of the year I'll go to the army. They said, no, you have to go.
How tough.
And they didn't tell us. So he left, he took his pekalach. You understand the word pekalach? I think most of our listeners probably would. He takes his few belongings and he leaves and goes and works on the moshav next door. However, we were not told. We were not told he's leaving, please be nice to him, have a party, say goodbye. It was done like thieves in the night. In the same way that my late father escaped from Vienna, he was sent away from Merchavia. So, the story that we were nice to survivors is not correct. Until today, the survivors in Israel are very, very poor, even though Israel collected compensation on their behalf. It's another story, I shouldn't go there. So that's the background for me about my knowing about both the Holocaust and the attitude in the society in which I grew up to survivors.